So I've traveled to over 20 plus countries. And I thought that I had pretty much seen everything that you can see as a traveler, and especially as a Black traveler. In Ethiopia, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I was told that I was not a Black American because I did not walk like a Black American. In India, I was shocked to learn that people literally offered me money for my kinky Black hair. And then in Taiwan, I was so surprised to be walked around and followed with cameras, being called Kobe Bryant, and even Barack Obama's nephew. So I thought I saw everything until I moved to China. And this lovely little student there, Apple, my first grade student, one day I'm teaching the ABCs, and Apple takes it upon herself to walk up into the front of the classroom and lick my arm, wrist to elbow, twice. So I was shocked and confused, and I stormed out of my class and I called a buddy of mine who was also a teacher at a Chinese school, and I said, "Bro, your student's licking you." And he's like, "Yeah, man, yeah, somebody told them that I was made of chocolate." So I rushed into my office, talked to my Chinese colleagues. Did anybody tell my students that I was made of chocolate? Well, Busha, we would never do that, Leroy, Busha, Busha. So turns out, Apple's parents told her that I was made of chocolate because little Apple would cry anytime she had to come into her teacher's classroom. She had never seen a dark-skinned person before, let alone had one as a teacher. So this experience led me to create my first company in China, Black Gen. The purpose of Black Gen was to create a platform, an environment where Black expats, expats of all color, and the local Chinese community could come together and share who they were through our artistic lens, spoken word, poetry, dance, film. We organized events for 2 years throughout Beijing and Shanghai, and it was a hit. So much so that we were published and featured in several publications around China, including City Weekend magazine. And one day, I'm sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Beijing, and this Black woman walks in. She's like, "Hey, I know you." I had never seen this woman before in my life. She says, "I just moved to China from Atlanta, took a STEM teaching job at a prestigious high school, and I was so nervous. I didn't think I'd have a community. Where am I gonna get my hair done? Are people gonna accept me? What is it gonna be like for me as a Black person there?" And as she was sitting on her plane, there was a City Weekend magazine. And she picked up that magazine and she opened it up. And what did she see? She saw me, and she saw Black Gen. And she read about the community impact work we were doing, how we were creating opportunities for local Black businesses in Beijing, and how she had a home and a community waiting for her. And she told me in that moment she found the peace and comfort she needed to be at ease with her decision to move abroad to China. So, after that, I decided to take off. I knew that these stories could be inspiring, not just to me, but to other people that looked like me or came from similar backgrounds as my own. So I started a podcast called The Buddy Pass, and I traveled around the world, interviewing Black expats and travelers in Mexico, Ireland, Switzerland, wherever they were. I was gonna find them and I was gonna tell their story. And when I got back to the States, I did a bit of investigating, and I learned that the travel industry was really struggling on race and inclusion. They were struggling to advertise and market to Black travelers. They were struggling to tell their stories. So I decided to take it upon my, one more second. Despite that, Black travelers spend, and they spend big. In 2018, African-American travelers spent $63 billion on travel. In 2019, $129 billion. Every year, Black millennials, like myself, spend about $50 billion on travel, and most of that is driven by Black women. And even some of the experts in the travel industry have said those numbers are very conservative. Why? 54% of Black travelers will tell you that they're more likely to travel to a destination if they see themselves in the advertising. 70% of Black millennials are more likely to spend more on travel experiences with a brand that understands them and their identity and their culture. And 64% of African American travelers, one of the things they factor into the decisions to travel to a destination is the availability of African American culture and attractions and heritage. So, took it upon myself to start a magazine, the Buddy Pass magazine, to answer those questions and address those issues. A couple of months ago, we rebranded to Culture Travels Magazine. Why did I rebrand? Because our target audience identifies as culture. Not only that, I saw how impactful Black culture was around the world. I will never forget going to a club in downtown Beijing, and it's Tupac night, and there are Chinese people in the club dressed like Tupac and rapping Tupac lyrics. Would never forget it. Or I will never forget Asian women in countries around the world braiding their hair to look like Black women. I didn't think anything was wrong with it. I was inspired by it. That is my culture that is impacting the world. So I started a magazine so I could show people in my community how magnificent they are, how impactful their culture is. But not only that, everyone in this room, when you travel somewhere, that destination you go to, that culture touches you, and you walk away with a bit of it. To this day still, I eat with my hands because of Ethiopia. I sip on hot water, despite how crazy Americans think that is, because of China. We all are impacted by the culture that we engage when we travel, and vice versa. You leave a bit of yourself in that culture as well. So for me, it made sense that culture should be at the center of this brand. It touches our target audience, but also it speaks to everyone in a way. And so, I decided to come back, build Culture Travels Magazine, help businesses, not only in San Antonio, but around the world, connect to that target audience, that $50 billion market through our magazine, podcast, and video content. And we help businesses and destinations like Visit San Antonio, like Tank's Pizza, like the Carver Culture Center, connect to that travel market through our magazine, podcast, and video content. And so, the reason you all are here today is because two major events have happened to our city in this last 6 months. We all know the Spurs have drafted the #1 pick, and that player, congratulations, and that player is projected to generate over $500 million in value to the team and city. What can that do for our community and our businesses? Not only that, in March, the city of San Antonio hosted the IPW Travel Conference. That conference, whenever a city hosts that, brings that city $600 million of tourism value over the next 3 years. Our community, our businesses, our city is likely to see close to $1 billion tourism boom over the next 3 to 5 years. How do we make sure that our community members and our businesses are positioned to benefit from that economic prosperity? So with that, my name is Leroy Adams. I am the founder and publisher of Culture Travels Magazine. We help travelers connect to destinations and the unique culture of that destination through our magazine, podcast, and video content. And we help local businesses and destinations connect to the African American travel market, a multi-billion-dollar travel market, through our magazine, podcast, and video content. And so, with the very important conversation that we have going on today in the community, I'm excited to bring it all to you today and give you all an opportunity to ask those burning questions that's on your hearts and your mind. I've spoken to many of you in the community, and I know how passionate you are about the subject of today. So thank you for coming to the panel. I would like to thank one of our sponsors, SA Startup Week, which is a program at Geekdom, if you're not familiar. First of all, love Geekdom. We have been, our company has been working with Geekdom downtown, the incubator company, for months. They've helped us refine our vision, set up our financial strategy, connect us to mentors in the business community. So if you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, innovator, You definitely want to get connected to Geekdom, and you definitely want to check out SA Startup Week here in October, which is a one-week event that has activations, workshops, speaking engagements, really, really great space for entrepreneurs, innovators to be, check out here in October. If you want more information about SA Startup Week or Geekdom, you can find myself. After the event, I'm more than happy to share my experience about Geekdom and SA Startup Week with you. So we have a very dynamic group of panelists up here. We have Ms. Jenny Carnes, the CEO of SA Sports. We have Dr. Kara Allen, the Chief Impact Officer for the San Antonio Spurs. And real quick, I just want to tell you, every time I see you, you got the freshest kicks. Like the freshest. I try to have the freshest kicks. You coming out, do me with the J's. Always fly. And we have Mr. Jeff May, the Chief Administrative Officer for the San Antonio African American Community Archive Museum. Let me tell you how many times Ms. Deborah has checked me for saying Culture Archive Museum every time, even since threatening text, but I love her though. So happy to have y'all here. Thank y'all for joining me. One second. Ms. Jenny Carnes, I want to start with you because truth be told, I just learned about your organization about a month ago, thanks to one of your colleagues, Ms. Mary back there. First, introduce yourself. Tell us about your organization, please, and tell us about your role within your organization.
Well, happy Friday, everybody. I have to start with a few housekeeping items for myself. One, we hosted an event today for San Antonio Sports, so I've been out in the sun since 7 a.m., got up at the crack of dawn. I'm a little bit dehydrated, tired, and loopy. So if I can't complete a sentence, Kara's going to help me out. Two, I'm usually really on brand for San Antonio Sports, but I had a number of external meetings and events this week. My clothes are in the hamper. So given the conversation tonight, I had to bring my Spurs game. Lastly, and you're already on the list, I'm going to challenge. May ask Mary to keep tabs. For the number of times, closer? Do we even need a mic?
Do you need a mic?
Okay. For the number of times that we incorrectly say the AT&T Center versus the Frost Bank Center, whoever has the most at the end of the night has to buy a round for everybody here. You said it 3 times. Are you on board,
Who's keeping
Kara?
tally? Who's keeping tally? Who's keeping tabs? Who's keeping tabs? If we don't remember who said it the most, whoever has the freshest kicks has to buy those rounds.
Okay, I'm trying.
Right.
I'm trying. Well, okay, I'll be serious now. I told you I'm loopy. I'm tired. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. This is such an important conversation, not only for your district, but for our city right now. It's a hot topic. Jenny Carnes, President and CEO of San Antonio Sports. If you're not familiar with our nonprofit, we are your sports commission for this community. We've been around for almost 40 years. We will celebrate our 40th anniversary next year. We are one of the largest and strongest sports commissions in the country, and I think, and I know I'm biased, we're also one of the strongest and most high-profile nonprofits in San Antonio, making big impact for your community. Our mission is to transform San Antonio sports through the power of sport, and we have a vision and a plan and a passion for healthy kids and families, places to play, and events that really make an impact for San Antonio. I've been with the organization for 24 years this week.
Congrats.
It had an anniversary.
Love the longevity. Love it.
I started when I was in junior high, clearly. Now, I started as an intern, and it's been a journey for me to be a part of not only San Antonio sports, but what we do for San Antonio. And, I don't live in this district. I'm District 10, but I can literally say I live more in this district than I do at home. We office out of the Alamo Dome. We've been there for 20 years this summer when the Spurs built the AT&T Center, and I can say that if you look backwards, and moved over to the east side here. It opened up some office space for San Antonio sports. So I've literally lived in the Dome for the last 20 years. I primarily have spent my time at San Antonio Sports focusing on all of the NCAA Final Fours that come to the city and bring major economic impact. And I know we're going to get into some of that
Some major
soon.
economic impact.
I'm a huge sports fan. I believe in the transformational power of sport, and I'm sitting here as a true testament to that. I would not be where I am today in life, in my career, if not for what sport did for me. I'm a small town kid. I grew up in the country, and I started playing sports at an early age. And all that it's given me and all that it has done for this community and will continue to do is what gets me out of bed every morning.
I have one question for you before we go on to our next panelist. Could you share some insight on trickle-down economics to local communities from hosting major sporting events like the NCAA Final Four? If I understand correctly, your organization, the Alamo Dome, you all host the NCAA games, correct? Okay. How does that math work in terms of being able to sort of see how these sporting events are impacting our community economically?
I got the questions in advance last night, and I jotted down some notes because I don't want to mess up the math here because this is a really good question. We impact the community at a really deep level with families and kids and providing opportunities, but really the Final Fours is what drives, and big events, other big events that we do with Visit San Antonio, that drives tourism here. And the Final Four is the biggest thing that San Antonio will ever do in terms of events. In my lifetime, we will never bring a Super Bowl here without an NFL team. We will never bring the Olympics here. So the Final Four is the biggest thing we do. We will have the men's Final Four back here in 2025 for our 5th men's Final Four. We have a women's Final Four returning in 2029 for our 4th. And in 2025, we were estimating that will bring $220 million of direct visitor spending into our community. Over 40,000 hotel room nights, over 75,000 visitors. And let me tell you the trickle-down effect. And as long as I've been doing this, this is usually what I say. Residual tourism. So from tip-off of college basketball season in November to when we crown the national championship in April on a Monday night, they are talking about the road to San Antonio on national broadcasts, on international broadcasts, and that is media value and media exposure that the city and Visit San Antonio will never be able to afford in ad buys. And if you come to the event or you're watching it on TV and you live in Hoboken, New Jersey, you see these outtakes of San Antonio and the Alamo and the Riverwalk and what a beautiful city.
The Pearl.
The Pearl, the East Side, Tony G's. You see, you watch this and you think, God, that's a beautiful city. I'm going to take my next vacation in San Antonio. Or you come here for the tournament, and maybe this is your first time to San Antonio, and you go back home as a college basketball coach, and they're telling their spouses, let's do our family vacation this summer. You can't track that dollar amount, that value, but it's residual tourism. Okay, so here's the next number. Now I have to refer to my stats. So in 2025, with 40,000, and those are contracted room nights already, and who knows how many more beyond that, that will produce over $60 million in hotel revenue. And if you're all familiar with the hot tax here in San Antonio, hotel occupancy tax and what that means for the city gets 9%, 7% general operating, 2% to convention center expansion. The county gets 1.75%. That doesn't even count the 1.75% that goes to the new tourism, the TPID fund for Visit San Antonio. That in true trickle-down economics dollar sense is over $4 million that goes to the city of San Antonio that in turn goes to arts and culture, infrastructure, convention center, future promotion of tourism in San Antonio, and that's why we do what we do. And there's a lot more to a Final Four than that, but we're talking tourism tonight. So that's my trickle-down economics tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Want to introduce the rest of our panelists here. Dr. Kara Allen, Chief Impact Officer for the San Antonio Spurs. Could you tell us a bit about your organization and your role within it?
Hi. Goodness. It's great to be with y'all, to share space with you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for putting me on the spot multiple times. So if you don't know about the San Antonio Spurs, we have a deep commitment to healing, access, and belonging as part of how we show up in community. As a matter of fact, we talk about that through the lens of building leaders and legacies. And for now 51 years, we've had a deep commitment to building leaders and legacies where we live, learn, work, and play, where we center things bigger than ball. And truly, we show up to do the hard work, particularly when the cameras aren't on, around healing, access, and belonging. So if you didn't know that about the San Antonio Spurs, let me know. I'm happy to share more. Don't you want to see me? Sounds horrible. Only thing worse than one of me is two of me. So that's the San Antonio Spurs. And the role that I have at the Spurs as Chief Impact Officer, well, here, I'll tell you this. I'm still very much earning my right to show up in community, particularly here on the East Side for folks who've been doing the work, who've grown up here, who've invested in community here for a long time. I am relatively new to San Antonio, about 2 years, did a little less than 2 years. My daughter goes to Young Women's Leadership Academy down the street. I picked her up from after school, dropped her off at what, fingers crossed, will be her second ever sleepover, and then headed this way. If I check my phone, it's likely because it is the sleepover community telling me that my child's no longer sleeping over. But other than that, all things good. Prior to joining the work of healing, access, and belonging with the Spurs, I was actually started as a teacher as well. I was a teacher in Oakland Unified School District, and I was also a basketball player. I was a basketball player who was the captain who only went in when you definitely knew who was winning the game. I'm that girl. Either we were really winning or we were really losing, but you really knew the score. And I will say, I will never forget my commitment to the power of sport, my commitment to sport for good, sport for change, change for good, was when I was teaching in Oakland, and a little girl from Indiana real quickly learned she couldn't save the world the way that I thought I could save the world. But I was reading a math problem, and one of the young men in my class, so all the kiddos in my class were labeled severely emotionally disturbed, and one of the kiddos in my class raised his hand, and he's like, "Miss Kara, I don't understand the question." And so I read the math question again, because right, you're supposed to read the question and keep reading the question and teach the test, I thought. I kept reading the question, and then finally he's like, "Miss Kara, I don't know what the F a bushel is." And I, see? And it hit me like, I don't either. I don't know what a bushel is. Like, what are you talking about? And so I said, "Kenny, what do you know about?" And he's like, "Running backs." And I was like, So this will now age me, but I went down to the Oakland Raiders practice facility and I sat and waited until a player came out. And the first person to come out was not a running back, but a punt returner. I didn't know at the time, but I said, "Hey, sir, do you think you would come to my classroom?" And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Could you just come to my classroom?" Again, I'm going to age myself, but could you read the stats in the newspaper, like on the Monday after your game? Because Mondays were, when we didn't play football every day of the week, Mondays were like, for most teams, a day off or like a video day. He's like, "I guess you'll have to talk to my agent." And I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that means. Sure." So I call the agent, and he's like, "Sure, we can do that once." Well, every Monday that they didn't have a game, that player came to the classroom and read his stats. And this is it, right? Like, sport became a connection for math. Math made sense. The progress of the young people in that classroom was wild, and it had nothing to do with teaching because I was a horrible teacher. But math made sense. And we got proximal. We allowed young people to get proximal to things that made sense to them. And so for everything forward, I got my master's in social work, and it was a master's in teaching, a doctorate in ed leadership for social justice, truly, because I actually don't know that I answered the question, and I probably shouldn't go back to school. too many student loans and I don't know what to do with it all. But I will say, still trying to figure out, like, how do we connect the dots in ways that haven't been done before? And maybe I'm naming that to tell you, I'm probably not going to give you a lot of the answers you want here, because to be honest, like, so much of this work we're still figuring out. I will tell you, I think different than a lot of the things that you probably think about when you think about the Spurs. And I'm here to have those conversations. And what I'm also here to do is get proximal. What I'm also here to do is listen and learn and figure out how to get better. And what I'm also here to tell you is, listen, like, this is the work for me. Like, it's the showing up. I'm an introvert by default, but I'm an extrovert for community. And I'll show up to have the hard conversations and listen. Last story, I'm sorry.
Good, do your thing.
I called so I have a 10-year-old sleepover child, and I have an older kiddo, 4 older kiddos who were adopted through foster care, but the oldest is 30, and she is at med school, and she just finished her rounds for the day, so she's going to sleep. And I called her on the way here, and she's like, just don't say anything that'll embarrass me. Girlfriend, nobody knows you in that room. You're fine. But I have an accountability to something much greater than myself, not alone the brand of the Spurs or the colors of the Spurs on my sneakers. It's the only cool thing about me. But also to people who I am indebted to making me hopefully a little bit more of a whole human. So thanks for letting me be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming.
I do real quick, just because of the space we're in, I want to give you an affirmation, right? Because you said you are a horrible teacher, and I think teaching is about much more than a delivery of a lesson. It's about making meaning for your students.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so for that, I heard that when you were speaking, and so I don't want you to enter this space from and down yourself and be negative. So affirmation, of course.
Jeff, before you go, I'd also like to thank you because you probably made NFL history. It was probably the first time in NFL history that someone asked a punter. Punt returner. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said punter. I was like, punt returner, do a public appearance?
Wait, I'm sorry. I just took this.
What in the...
Wait, listen to this. This human is now a human rights attorney in North Carolina, largely because he realized, I actually don't care about the things on field. I want to figure out how to do the right things in community.
And I wonder if that experience you gave him sort of was the spark for him in that
Maybe.
manner. Yeah.
We got proximal to
You
each
got
other.
it. Yeah. Jeff, introduce yourself, sir, and the organization you were with, and what's your role there?
Good evening, everybody. It's good. Thank you for the claps in the back. Don't think I'm popular. I'm not. My name is Jeff May. I proudly serve as the CAO of the San Antonio African American Community Archive Museum. And the kind applause in the back came from my City Year family. City Year is in the building. I want y'all to give them a hand. We talk about folks who are on the front line, and they are on the front line every day, all day. And before I became the CAO of SACAM, we can just say SACAM.
Yes,
takes the pressure,
Thank you, bro.
off of you.
I appreciate you.
Before I became the CAO of SACAM, I was able to serve in what I think is one of the most influential and greatest ministries you can serve is children. I was in education for almost 13 years. I started when I was 10. And for me, that took me from Detroit to Virginia, to North Carolina, to Chicago, to Ferguson, and now here. And all without a teaching degree. But I had transparency because I realized that if I could show my scars, then I gave my students an opportunity to know that they could heal. Again, when I was open and I was transparent, they could see, oh, I could get there. And I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to fit in a box. I don't have to do it this person's way or that person's way, but I can be me. So the best way for me to show up in any space, especially now with my capacity at SACAM, is now I can show up even more transparent, right? I could be 10 toes down on the culture because, again, our job at SACAM is to collect, preserve, and share the rich African American history here in the Texas region. And for me, what that means in education is we are now in the midst of creating a curriculum, a 6th through 12th grade curriculum for African American studies in schools. Yeah, y'all saw the news, huh? So for me, when we look at what's happening in Florida and we look at what's happening in education and people are afraid to speak and to say and to teach, I can now be in a situation where I can change the temperature. I can now be at a situation where I can be at the table and say, this is what you need to teach. This is what you need to be saying. And we can't do that without our elders. We can't do that without people in the community. And then speaking of that, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge a man in the back whom I love very dearly and respect very much. Mr. Mims is in the back. Could you stand up, Mr. Mims? I know it's my introduction, but it's upon those, kindness. We planned that, yeah. But and the reason why I did that in my introduction, I would not be here if it weren't for gentlemen like him. And it's upon his shoulders that I stand. And as I stand upon those shoulders, sir, I just want to make you proud. I appreciate it. But for me, that's the work that we do. So at SACAM, our job, again, is to collect, preserve, and share the rich history of African Americans in this region. And we have to do that with boldness. We have to do that loudly. We have to do that even when we're alienated or when we're silenced or set aside, because you can't set aside who you are. We've been here. You know what I'm saying? We've been here. And I have a great opportunity to learn and to be led by an awesome woman. And her name is Deborah Omawale Jarman, who is our CEO of SACAM. And tonight I just pay homage to her and to all of our community members who are here in support. So glad to be with you.
You know, bro, I want to give SACAM and Ms. Deborah y'all flowers, because it was Ms. Deborah and SACAM that first made our community and businesses in our community aware of IPW. Ms. Deborah sits on the board of Visit San Antonio. She organized an event down at the Eye of the Beholder, art gallery, about 5 minutes up the road here. And she informed us about IPW and told us what it was and how to get engaged. And so, again, we all know any city that has hosted that event has seen close to a $500 million boom in tourism. And so for you, Jeff, how important is tourism to local businesses, particularly here in District 2?
One of my favorite movies, and we'll see who the old heads are in the building. We'll see. People locked in. Wood Harris starred in this movie, Mekhi Phifer starred in this movie, and Cameron started in this movie. And that movie is called Paid in Full. That's what I'm talking about. And
everybody got to eat, B.
There it is. Everybody eats, B.
Everybody eats, B.
Everybody eats. And, we were, kids walking around in school talking about everybody eats, B. And, again, I was sent to the principal's office and like, well, who's everybody? Who's B? So for me, and I still watch that movie like I'm watching it for the first time, and that part always gets me, right? Because in our community, not only should everybody eat, but it's not just enough to be at the table, but when you're at the table, you got to eat too. Don't just say you at a table and you check the box just because you invited me. Huh? Because when I get to the table, I'm going to bring a chair because I'm not the only one that look like me that need to be at this table. So when we thought about IPW, we just didn't think about SACAM, but we thought about the entire community. This is a book that I was able to give to somebody today who's brand new to San Antonio, and they said, well, where are we? Where can I get my hair done? What schools can I go to? Where can I find a home-cooked meal to make me feel like I'm at mama's place? Where can I support Black and brown businesses? I was able to give them this. And this Soul of San Antonio catalog, and we have cards, shameless plug, over there, is the brainchild of Miss Deborah and of Miss Cassandra Nowinski from the Carver. And their thought was, when people come into San Antonio, let's not talk about it would be a great idea to support businesses. Let's create a roadmap. If it's arts, it's here. If it's food, it's here. These are Black and brown businesses that we were able to put this in folks' hands when they were here and told them, go at it, have at it. Again, it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to put your money and your resources and your efforts where your mouth is. So again, I would hope none of you would leave without this. And we don't have it just in book form. We have it in card where you can scan the QR code because that's technology. But again, this is why it's so important. Because as you have all of this foot traffic in the city, where does that foot traffic go? Right? And it's super important, I think, to have people at the table. I know you said you sat on some boards.
Sir.
And I think it's important that we're all on boards. And I would love to see that day where we don't have to tell people Juneteenth is a holiday. I would love to be in a place where we don't have to tell people that slavery did not benefit us. I would love to be in a place where I wouldn't have to tell people the obvious, right? I work in a museum where I get flooded with calls in February and June. Well, can you bring a pop-up display? And listen, man, I got a call. The person was so upset and so flabbergasted that they were about to let June go by and they hadn't done anything yet. And they said, sir, what can I do? I said, you can relax, breathe, and understand that we're Black 365 days of the year. So there is no rush to do anything in June. There is no rush to do anything in February. But if you really want to be transparent and keep it a buck, you should do it in July. You should do it in December. You should do it in January. You should do it because the people you say you care for are Black 365, 7 days a week. And so is our museum. We're open 7 days a week, 365, 218 South Presser.
I see you shining, bro. I see you shining. As for the last 5 months of 2022, it generated $31 million. And there's a quote from Mayor Ron Nirenberg I'd like to share. The Alamo Dome is a valued asset that has put our community on the map and improved our quality of life on so many levels. So my question to you and the rest of the panelists is, the mayor called that a community asset. Many in the community consider the Alamo Dome a community cultural asset. Obviously, the economic prosperity is there. What ideas, do you all have in terms of how can this community share in that economic prosperity? I know we're talking about foot traffic and awareness and things of that nature, but and what are the ideas in terms of how can we make sure the community is sharing in that economic prosperity?
Well, first of all, the $4 billion of economic impact, San Antonio Sports can take credit for almost 25% of that. Got to throw that out there. Thank you, Mary. I think one of the misconceptions about the Alamo Dome over the last 30 years, I think we were one of the first and maybe only domed facilities, sports venues in the country that opened debt-free. And the community at large has this perception of the building being vacant, in ruins, costing taxpayer dollars. Yeah. That's not true. It is a community venue that has been impacting our citizens for 30 years. And I know, because I said earlier, I live there. I see 37 high school graduations a year and hear the song over and over for rehearsal and the graduation. I see community events that come through, home and garden shows, the big events, the concerts. That building was made for our community. I know the plan for it was to lure an NFL team here and of course, move the Spurs away from Hemisphere, but it has truly become the center and the heart of our community. Yeah. And what the future of the Alamo Dome looks like, I leave that up to you and your counterparts. But we're at an interesting crossroads with all these conversations with the Spurs and Missions baseball. But it's time to double down on the Dome and reimagine and transform the future of that community venue so it continues to not only be a resource for our citizens, but it continues to be very competitive for our tourism industry so we can continue to have conversations with the NFL, continue to have conversations with the NCAA and bring big events, continue to lure these concerts that all of a sudden our dome is killing it the last 2 years with all these concerts they're bringing. So I hope you and your colleagues will have an open mind and what am I trying to say? I told you I was tired. Just an open mind about what it can be for the next 30 years for San Antonio. Not just the community venue, but how it can advance the entire city. in your district?
For sure, and I'll say right now that over the past, going back last year and over the next few years, we're putting about $20 million into the Alamo Dome. And
This
it's
year,
not gonna-
correct?
And it's not going to be nearly enough. It's not going to be nearly enough. And so I'll give y'all something. I'll say something a little goofy to y'all. It hurt my heart. I read an article, and it was a list of the ugliest buildings in America. And the Alamo Dome was way up there on that list. I think it was number one. I think it was the ugliest building in America. And I was like, a lot of my colleagues at that point didn't even realize that the Alamo Dome was in District 2. Problem number one. But the second part of that, is, you know, as we're talking about things like the wayfinding devices and how we create a more conducive flow of people into the community and to the businesses, that should be a part of any reimagination of the space. And so when we're thinking about land around the Alamo Dome that we might be able to acquire, or we might already have, or around the Frost Bank Center that we might already have, or we might be able to acquire, that has to be at the forefront. Is that a huge issue has been the flow of traffic that guides people directly away from the east side, and how do we make that facility and that flow of people into the community something that the people who are already here can benefit from? And like I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be for outside people to come in and invest finally and put businesses up so that they can make money because we've reconfigured the space. It needs to be people from the community who are given an opportunity. And so that's going to have to be done very creatively, and I think we're going to have to come up with some sort of program, but that needs to be at the forefront of any reimagining.
Dr. Allen, the Spurs and their new, no, you're good, complex over on the north side. It's pretty cool, I've heard. I haven't been there, but apparently I've heard that it's an entertainment venue. It has a large dog park, mixed-use commercial development, like really, really cool complex on the north side. The question I have is, clearly the popularity of the Spurs is growing. How can this popularity and the investments contribute to this needed growth and innovation in District 2, whether that is through tourism, economics, or placemaking?
I think the Rock, which is lovingly called, right? The Rock, the Human Performance Center.
That's what it's called?
That's right, the Rock.
Who gave it that name?
So the Rock is named after here we go, history lesson. Pop often cites, and the only thing that's framed in the locker room is the story of the Rock, which is essential. I'm not going to say the whole thing by Jacob Riis, but it says it's not that final blow when the rock breaks, right? It's not that final blow that made it happen. It was all the hits that came before it, right? It's pound the rock.
Yeah.
So when you hear us talk about pounding the rock, one, it's about doing something bigger than self. Two, it's recognizing none of us can do it by ourselves. And three, it's recognizing that when success does happen, it has nothing to do with that one human. It won't be Victor. It won't be just Pop. It won't be any one of us. It's all the folks. It's a conversation about ancestral realities as applied to sport. Ooh, okay. Now, the Rock. The work of the Rock is only successful when the things that happen to the Rock benefit people that are not on the north side. Now, for a practice facility is a practice facility, right? And a building is a building. And also, there is a research center in the Rock. And if that research center doesn't center research, which allows all of us to better understand the communities on the east side and the west side and the south side, and we cannot thus better serve, support, show up alongside those community members, then we will have failed at saying the Rock is a community space by default. That won't be a success. The alternative is to say, what do we know to be true? I'll use an example. We know by data tells us, I'm not a data nerd. I don't have any numbers to tell you as I move on feeling and I know with deep sincerity and data-backed reality as humans, we live longer if we feel as though we belong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is true. It is the reason, I would argue, a reason you started more than one business that you've started. It's some version of belonging.
Yeah.
And if we do not thus do the research to better understand what it means to belong in any of the communities here, and we don't share that information, then what are we doing talking about human performance? Because human performance is not how fast you move on a court. It's not ensuring that we don't have motionless capture to best understand how players move. No, it's to understand how humans perform alongside one another. And so I share that not to gloss over the fact that this multi-million-dollar facility is built on the north side. And it's to name the responsibility that that building has to never keep what it learns in the building. And that's a human reality, but that for me, that's the lure of the rock is quite simply that. Learn really well, take what we learn and do better alongside community. And I will name, part of that is also resisting the urge to, which I think is often an urge for folks that look like me, to think that we know the answer to a community's problems. We don't.
Well, that's what I want
By
to ask.
default,
How do we move from this culture of gatekeeping information?
Ooh, beautiful question. It is not our responsibility to tell any community what they need, it is absolutely not. It is our responsibility to listen. We talk about moving at the speed of community a lot. That means, I'll use another example outside of this space, but relevant to the conversation, the Uvalde community, right? My role and responsibility is also to show up in times of need, time of crisis. There were public conversation on the Spurs doing nothing. And I didn't say anything and was quietly, I've been in Uvalde almost every month for the last 14 months. More than actually every month for the last 14 months. And we've raised well over $1 million. There's a group of young women who will leave high school with 5 or 6 figures in their pockets by commitments that we've made to them as a result of a crisis they have no control over. That's moving at the speed of community. If the community doesn't want the story told, we don't tell the story. We just show up and do the work and quietly keep showing up to do the work. It's the difference. So it may be a tension in a reality because we don't do a good enough job sometimes of storytelling. I will say that to how we show up community. Or perception can be that we don't do a good job of storytelling. And if my option is to tell a story or show up when nobody's there, I'm always going to show up when nobody's there. And I think that the reason I share that and like how we talk about gatekeeping is the performative thing to do is to blast the story everywhere. The performative thing to do is honestly that it's not the building leaders and legacies. It's actually not starting Spurs Community Leadership Institute and investing in the folks who are doing the mental health work, because that's not, community's telling us it needs that.
Well, I just think about, I hear you and I see you and I feel your passion. You know what I mean? And I met folks on your team.
I'm ready for your and.
And who are really committed and dedicated to the community. But then I think about the ownership and the investors. And Jalen, you pointed to this earlier. Developers, folks who have no emotional connection to this community, but coming and profiting off of the community. Airbnb co-founder, Jeff Vieira, who in his quote is like, I'm looking forward to, equity and community engagement. Is the ownership and investors preparing to come and talk to community members? And I hope I'm not like getting fired up because again, I see you and I feel you, but I don't see the ownership or the investors making an attempt. And if I'm wrong, call me out, but I don't see them making an attempt to come and talk with our, community members, business owners, council person and say, hey, how can we engage the community and be better? And I see Jenny grab the mic. You coming for me?
No, actually.
Okay.
I'm going to go off script real quick
All
because thank you for those comments. I spoke on another panel with Kara recently, and she literally whispered into the mic, I could care less the win-loss record of the Spurs. she said that in a group of about 100 people. And the work that you've done, Morgan, your team, the Spurs, in my hometown of Uvalde, and I mentioned earlier, I'm a small town kid that grew up in the country. That's my town. And if y'all missed it in the news and the headlines, the Spurs were recognized for the NBA Humanitarian Award this year. And I know we're talking about tourism and dollars and economic impact, but I could not grab the mic, not grab the mic and say thank you. Now you can answer that question.
She gave me some time to answer. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you. And it's an honor, right? And that's our job.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to name pretty unapologetically, Peter Holt is like no other owner. That man is built different. That we are not a team of multimillionaire. Like that man has deeply in his family, deeply committed to this community at all costs, the San Antonio community at all costs. I am not saying any of us have always gotten it right. What I can and will say is the Spurs and the Holt family, the legacy, the tradition, the commitment is here in San Antonio, unapologetically. What I can also say is I just joined sports. I didn't dream of working in sports. And oftentimes I'm like, dang, I feel like I used to change the world and now I'm sitting in an arena. And Paul Vieira could have sat with nobody when he decided to join the Spurs, or he could have just talked to all the other people that everyone wants to talk to. Nobody comes to become an investor, I would imagine, of a sports team and is like, hey, I want to talk to an impact officer. And Paul and I talked the entire game. And when he says that quote that you read, if you look at his investments in other places, I actually would say he's actually pretty real on that. And does it feel like it yet? I hear you if you feel like no. I see you. And I meet with Paul. In the next 2 weeks, I have a meeting with Paul. And
Invitation?
What's up?
Is that an invitation?
It's me telling you I have a meeting with Paul. Give me a minute. Let me do some work. But I genuinely,
I got you.
The performative change can be really quick. Institutional, fundamental, long-term, lasting. You use the word permanent. I am here for all the short-term hits. I am much more here for the long-term legacy that changes the game. I hope my name's never attached to it, and I am so hopeful that the Spurs, that San Antonio, that D2, that the story is that we can do something different. And we can learn from history, and we can learn from the things that we haven't gotten right. And more importantly, that the long-term lasting change, I can't do the short-term check the box.
So I want to ask one last question before we open it up to the audience. And I will start with you, Jeff, and I just want each of you take 2 minutes and answer this question for us. So clearly we've talked about the economic opportunities that are going to come here over the next several years. My question to each of you here is, how are your businesses or organizations preparing for that economic impact? Like, what does that look like? What advice do you have to the entrepreneurs, the business? Because I've had folks come up to me and say, bro, should I go ahead and open up that coffee shop that I've been thinking about? Should I go ahead and open up that Airbnb? So for you all here, how are you preparing, your organizations preparing for that? And what advice do you have to the community members? Is it getting your social media up? Is it, working with Business San Antonio? Like, what does that preparation look like?
We can't begin to ask people who are not of this community to do something that we're first not willing to do ourselves. And I believe that starts with keeping that same energy. At SACAM, we understand that when people walk through our doors, they may have forgot what they read, they may have forgot what they interacted with, some of the exhibits, but they will never forget how they felt. People may forget, right? We heard that quote, right? What, you told them or what they heard from you, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. People need to feel something. But the only way they're going to feel it for real is if we're for real with it. So when I say keep that same energy, you become viable not for the visitors coming in, but for the people who've been here. You begin to build your websites, or you begin to improve your business. You begin to improve your hospitality, not because you're expecting outsiders to come in, but because you want to be a good steward to the community who's been here. We tend to look at communities of color and say, well, they're not progressive, or they don't want to, like, wait a minute. Because when your idea of progress leaves certain people back, moves certain people out. I was born and raised in Detroit, and Detroit looks like a different place. I have the privilege of finally going back. I'm an educational consultant, and next week, or 2 weeks, I get a chance to go back and open up a school year for a school that's in a neighborhood, a district that's in the neighborhood that I grew up in. Out of all my travels, that means so much to me because I'm able to go back home. But I'm going to be real with you. When I go back home, home looks so different. It's gentrified. The people who used to feel comfortable where they live feel out of place. And the city calls that progress. But who's progressing? Again, if we don't have everybody in mind. So my answer to that question is us keeping the same energy means that we have to do the things to make ourselves viable where we are, with who we have, with what we have right now. A spirit of excellence has to be what we're after, no matter who comes in our city or who goes, no matter who's drafted or who stays, no matter who's active or who's not. And it also requires the community to demand that folks stop knighting themselves community advocates. You cannot be a community advocate because you say you are. You're only a community advocate, and you're only called that by the people you're advocating for. And if they haven't called you one, then that's a lot of space for you to learn, listen, and move accordingly. Learn, listen, and move accordingly. And when I work in education, I rattled off all these cities that I've been to. Detroit is my home. And every other city I went to, before I had the ministry of working with their youth, I had to respect the fact that I was a visitor. I had to respect the fact that there was a community here way before I got here. I had to respect the fact that, yes, I'm a transplant, but I'm not a savior. This isn't mission work. This is an opportunity for me to learn from a community, and not in a deficit base, but to see the strengths, the possibilities, the opportunities that lie within the community and help that community leverage those things. So if you're a small business, a startup business, become viable to your own level of what your personal excellence is. You strive for that, to where when people engage with you, they never forget how you made them feel, the experiences that they got from whatever you're offering. And then it's for real, it's authentic, and it's genuine.
Jenny says she don't think anybody can follow that. That's why Kara passed the mic. Nah, bro, you go. So, Jalen,
I'm never scared.
What are you saying to your constituents? How can they best prepare for this tourism boom?
I want to get to that point, and I want to talk about the gentrification being framed as progress. And I started my term, and Margaret was here when I said it. I said that, economic development is probably the area that I want to do the most learning, because it's not my background, it's not my experience, that's not the reality that I have is in that. And something that I go about conversations about economic development, and we're having all these conversations, and we're facing the reality that San Antonio is the most, at the time, I'm not sure if it still is, but I believe it is, the most economically segregated city in the country. And what's glossed over is that economic segregation is rooted in racial segregation. That economic segregation is rooted in racial segregation. And we have a conversation about affordable housing, and it's always framed as, you don't want to concentrate poverty. You can't don't put these entirely affordable units up. You need to You need to make sure that there's mixed rate. You don't want to concentrate poverty. Poverty is already concentrated. And then there's simultaneous articles saying San Antonio is the fastest economically integrating city in the country. And what does that tell you? That tells you that rich, wealthier folk are moving into poorer communities. We're the fastest gentrifying city in the country, and we're framing it as progress. Like we're somehow undoing decades and decades of systemic underinvestment, marginalization, and redlining. And so I say all that to say that I believe the strongest power that we have is in people. That's how I feel like I got to the seat and I've been allowed to serve in this seat is through the power of people. And so sometimes people think that I or my colleagues will be irritated when we get the incessant texts and Facebook tags and the Instagram messages and the calls to our office and I'm going to go to the media if this thing doesn't get solved. I'll go with you. I'm with you. I'm not a representative of the city. I'm a representative of the people to the city. And that's how I view the work. And so when I'm thinking about what can my community and what can businesses in the community do to prepare for a boom, we have to center people power. And so I think that means organizing. I'm trying to come up with a strategy on the fly. Me and my office haven't even strategized how we're going to approach meetings with Spurs or with city and county leadership and how with the community, how are we going to have conversations like this where we talk about a reimagining of these massive multi-million-dollar facilities? We haven't organized that yet. But what would help me along the way is those businesses and businesses like Tanks saying, these are the things that we want to see. These are the moves we're willing to make. We would like to, I want to stay where I'm at, but I would like to expand if there's an opportunity close to the Alamo Dome, if we're going to take, I'm going to overspeak, if we're going to get rid of one of the lots at the AT&T Center and we're going to make it a mixed-use development with retail and housing and we're going to do something like that, we want first dibs. And so I would say that that's how you prepare. You organize, you come with your demands, you say, hey, y'all didn't meet these demands for the past 20 some odd years. This time it's going to be different and we're demanding so. And there's other communities that have done similar. There's other corridors that I think we can point to. There's other people in this city who have benefited from similar negotiation tactics and from organizing in that way. And so it would be entirely remiss for me not to mention that the power of people is going to be in the power of the business leaders and the guests and the people who frequent our businesses. Secondary is going to be any conversations I have behind the scenes. Everything that I do is going to be guided by what my community tells me that they want and need. And thus far, it's been that. It's been to make sure that the community, that the city and the county and Spurs know people are angry. And as this conversation about rumors of, Spurs up and leaving and new arena and new stadium, this and that conversation unsettles an entire community. And that can't be left out of any of the articles, any of the decision-making factors. And so I would say the organizing is going to be a piece. I think the knowing that I'm not a representative of the city, I'm a representative of you, I think that's a key. And I don't know, I would say organizing is number one.
Got you. Jenny and Kara. You good? Yeah. No preparation.
I will say, I was a little dismissed. So I cast the sole vote for the Rock the Performance Campus, and I believe it was a zoning request at the time. I don't think I ever had a conversation with the Spurs leadership about that. When we're having, I'm getting calls from reporters for the first time as people are having conversations, and I don't think I was invited to the AT&T Center renaming it to the Frost Bank Center. And so I just want to be included as a partner because my community can't have a voice if the person who's supposed to represent
Absolutely.
them isn't allowed that opportunity.
Absolutely.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Let's open it
That's
up.
a period, not a comma.
Nah, that's real. Thank you. Let's open it up to the audience for questions. We got Uche walking around with the mic. Please, everyone, keep your questions. No testimonies. I'm gonna just say that. Be respectful of the time. Thank y'all. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand and Uche will bring the mic around to you. I do want to thank our panelists for coming out today on a Friday night, having this conversation. We have a gift for y'all, a Culture Travels t-shirt. Thank y'all so much for coming out tonight and having this conversation and engaging our community.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Y'all good. I would like to get photos with y'all and photos with the trivia winners. And I also love to thank the community for coming out as well, to attending this and bringing your questions. We will be doing more of this. Thank everyone for coming out tonight. Y'all be safe.
My friends.
Stay hydrated. Have a very good night. Thank y'all.
And folks, we have some, we have some information on SACAM.
Yes.
If you're looking for information on SACAM, the events, the expansion, boat tours, things that you can do with young people, please go over, grab some stuff. I see them right there. And especially the Soul of San Antonio literature. It's over there.
Y'all have time for a few pictures.
Now, let's go support and buy some food. Come on, let's buy some pizza, pasta, calzones, wings, bone in, all flat.
If you are a trivia winner, please stick around for a quick photo. Would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Where are the photographers?